All right, good evening, everybody. So good to be here with you today. You know, I was at a client's office this week out of town, and we were doing this training, and they had a platter of carrot sticks and celery sticks. And then over here, they had a whole bunch of like donuts and pastries and donut holes. And at the end of the 4-hour training, the entire platter of carrot sticks and celery sticks was full and everything else was gone. And it just reminds me how all of us know what's good for us, but man, those donuts sure taste good. That man, there's something about, it lacks nutritional value, but there's something about the immediate gratification of just a lick of that donut, right? A bite of that pastry. And it's one reason why I love what Ron and Kevin and what the vision of Rock Point is here, is that tonight is, in one sense, it's celery sticks and carrot sticks. It's steak. It's nutrition tonight. This isn't gonna be donuts and pastries. In this series, my goodness, I love this. You look at the series here, next month, Christology with Tommy Nelson, if you've never heard Tommy, right? That's something you're in for a treat for. It's gonna be rich and deep. You're going, wow, look at the next one. Pneumatology with Walter Nusbaum again. Forget that one, skip that one, go to November. Bibliology with Kevin. Anthropology and hamartiology with Sam Storms. If you guys know who Sam is, that's gonna be a real treat for you guys. You just start going through this. You got Pastor Ron, Dr. Yarnell, Dr. Grace, Dr. Bach coming in for eschatology. You know, this is nutritional stuff. And so I admire the vision of what you guys are doing here. We got 250, 300 people here on what is tonight? Tuesday night? Is this a Tuesday? Tuesday night? I don't know. I'm flying out again tonight. I have no idea what night it is. Coming here for the doctrine of God. And I love that. I love that. You know, the doctrine of God, believe it or not, is coming back again. All the research shows that the new atheist movement, are you guys familiar with that movement? The Daniel Dennett's and the Sam Harris's and the Hitchenses and the Richard Dawkins and all those guys, that movement has petered out. And you're beginning to see a decrease in the number of nuns. I don't mean nuns, N-U-N. Nuns that are people who are declaring no affiliation with faith. That God never, ever seems to be passé. He always comes back. I was in Houston, and this is just one of those bizarre moments. I get in an Uber. You talk about it being teed up for you. I was in an Uber and I get in. I usually try to talk with my Uber drivers if I can understand them. And I said, hey man, how's it going? And this is what this guy says. His name is John. He says, I don't know, man. I don't believe in God and I want to. I just don't know how. I'm not making that up. It's exactly what he said to me. I get in, it wasn't even 5 seconds in. Hey man, how's it going? Oh, I don't believe in God, but I want to, but I don't know how. And I said, really? I said, can you tell me why you don't believe in God? He said, yeah, man, I got one word for you, Harvey. And he began to tell me about the devastation of Harvey on the city of Houston and all the devastation that happened and how he began to see how does a good God allow such a devastation to happen in Houston, Texas, or you name the place, Hawaii, or wherever you want to name it, see? People can't get, and I told him, I said, isn't it interesting? I said, do you think you and I would be talking about God right now in your car if Harvey didn't happen? He goes, probably not. I said, maybe C.S. Lewis was right. C.S. Lewis once said that pain is God's megaphone to a deaf world. That maybe the reason God leaves pain and suffering and travail in this life is because it is the pain and suffering and travails of life that gets people to stop and think about the brevity of life. You all think that's true? Think about the mortality of life, the brevity of life. See? he can't escape it. He can't escape thinking about God. I got a phone call, an email a couple days ago. Guy said he heard me speak at this event about a week ago, and he says, is there any way you can just talk for a few minutes? My life is falling apart. Do you just have a few minutes to talk? I said, sure, here's my phone number. Give me a call. He called me yesterday. So we started talking, and he starts telling me about all this going on in his life. And he said, the real pain of my life, Walter, he said, I feel like my life, I'm so busy with everything I'm doing, but I feel like my life has no meaning. I have no meaning to my days. I just, one day goes into another day, goes into another day is what he said. They just blur together. And I want more from life. And so we talked, and I said, can I share something with you? And I walked him through what I call the 4 levels of happiness. And I said, you've been living in level 1 and level 2. You've not even tapped into level 3, but level 4 is the level that meaning and significance are found. See, level 1, we're gonna get into this, level 1 is the level of immediate gratification. It's the simplest of the levels. It's the steak you ate tonight. It's the dessert you just had. It's the concert that you go to. It's the shirt you buy off the rack that you put on that you feel pretty good in. It's that thing that you do that you get immediate gratification, and eventually it passes away and you're ready for the next one. And there's some people who get stuck in level 1. What's the next hit? What's the next thing? And then you got level 2. Level 2 is a little more satisfying. It gets you a little farther, and it's called the level of the ego comparative level. And it's the level now where I compare me to you. I compare my zip code to your zip code, my square footage to your square footage, my model in year to your model in year, my education to your education. And there are people that is how they live their life. They find their meaning and their significance in the comparative of me versus you, pulling up to the red light and looking right and looking left to see what you're in and what you're in and what I'm in, and I get some level of significance or meaning by the comparative nature of what's around me. See, that's level 2. And there's some people, they get a lot of satisfaction out of that, but it's limited as well, which is why you go to level 3, right? Level 3 is known as the contributive level. That's the level where you realize there's got to be more than just acquisition in life. There's got to be more than the stuff and the travels and the experiences of life. There has got to be some way that my contribution to life lasts longer than me. And so what do? We now contribute. We go help build something. This is why A-class actors who make 20 mil a film, who've got the house sitting on the cliff of Malibu, have got to go start an orphanage in Africa. That's why they've got to go build wells. It's because it's not enough to simply acquire an experience in this life. I've got to contribute and I got to give. And even that has its limitations. Even when I put my name through a contribution and it's slapped onto a building wall, when my name is Wallace Hall, and my name gets to go on for a generation or two until somebody else gives more money than I gave, and they take my name down and stick someone else's name up there, till my name gets off the stadium and somebody else's name gets on the stadium. See? It's not until you get to level 4. This is what I told this guy. I said, level 4 is the stage where you realize why you were made. And I said to him, I said, I want you to look around me, Rod. I said, tell me what you see. And he was in his car. He was calling me in his car. He said, I see other cars. I said, do those cars have a purpose? He said, yeah. I said, what is it? To drive. Okay. What else do you see? He said, I see restaurants. I said, do they have a purpose? He said, yeah. What's the purpose? To feed people. And he started, I said, what else do you see? And he started naming, and I said, isn't it interesting? Everything you're naming has a purpose. There's not a thing you're looking at that does not have a purpose. Do you think it would make sense then if everything around you has a purpose, do you think it would make sense that you have a purpose? He goes, I guess I never thought about it that way. I said, what do you think? He said, yes. I said, how do you find out what your purpose is? He said, I don't know. I said, you find out your purpose by finding out what is it that can't be taken away from you. See, because if your purpose is your marriage that you just lost, what happens to the purpose of your life? He says, you lose your purpose. Can you lose your kids? Tragically, yes. Can you lose your job? Yes. Can you lose your money? Yes. What's the one thing you cannot lose? He said, I don't know. And I said, it's God. God is the one thing that is the everlasting, the one who never will leave you, never will forsake you. And I said, Jason, he's the guy. God is the one who wants in your life. He's the one that will give you the ultimate meaning and satisfaction in your life. See, that is theology proper. It is the basis of everything else you're gonna learn over the next 9 months. It is where God becomes the established foundation of everything else that you believe in this life. So next month, when Tommy comes and does Christology, Christology will only make sense to the extent that theology proper is established, that there is a God, and this God is infinite and personal and loves this world so much that what? He gave his only begotten son through a thing called incarnation. I don't want to steal Tommy's thunder. And Tommy's gonna talk about that. And that only works if there is a God prior to that. The only way eschatology works is if there is a God who is omniscient by nature and knows the end from the beginning and has a plan, and he has a providential knowledge and a providential purpose, and he can make the end work however he wants. It's called eschatology, the end times, the last things, see? It's the doctrine of God. It is the foundation of what we believe. I wanna read you, in seminary, they'll tell you don't read anything too long. I'm gonna break that rule. Besides, I think I only have till 9, so I'll try to hurry. Okay. On January 7th, 1855, Charles Spurgeon, in his sermon, I want to read you the first couple paragraphs of his sermon. He wrote, "It has been said by someone, that the proper study of mankind is man. I will not oppose this idea, but I believe it is equally true that the proper study of God's elect is God. The proper study of a Christian is the Godhead. The highest science, the loftiest speculation, the mightiest philosophy which can ever engage the attention of a child of God is the name, the nature, the person, the work, the doings, and the existence of the great God who he calls his Father. There is something exceedingly improving to the mind in a contemplation of the divinity. It is a subject so vast that all our thoughts are lost in its immensity, so deep that our pride is drowned in its infinity. Other subjects we can compass and grapple with, and them we feel a kind of self-content and go our way with the thought, behold, I am wise. But when we come to this master science, finding that our plumb line cannot sound its depth, that our eagle eye cannot see its height, we turn away with the thought that vain man would be wise, but he is like a wild ass's colt. And with the solemn exclamation, I am but of yesterday and know nothing. No subject of contemplation will tend more to humble the mind than thoughts of God. We shall be obliged to feel. Great God, how infinite thou art. What worthless worms are we. But while the subject humbles the mind, it also expands it. Last line. I know nothing which can so comfort the soul, so calm the swelling billows of grief and sorrow, so speak peace to the winds of trial, as a devout musing upon the subject of the Godhead. How good is that? Anybody here experience in the past year a grief, a turmoil of soul that you have been desperate for the peace of God? Anybody the past year been desperate for the peace of God? Desperate for the turmoils of this world to be still, to have the God of this world look at the winds of your life and go, shh, be still. That's the God that Spurgeon talks about. See, that is the doctrine of God. It is a God that, my goodness, I mean, in 45 minutes, I'm supposed to talk about the doctrine of God. In 45 minutes. You know, this is one of those where you look at it and you just say, what can I do but merely scratch the surface of this? I mean, we could talk about God as being the ontological necessity, the metaphysical reality that underpins all reality. I mean, we could go really deep on this. I mean, I took a whole semester called The Doctrine of God, right? And I didn't even scratch the surface of it. I remember we read all of Aquinas's Summa Gentilis. We read his entire work in one semester and just barely scratched the surface of the very nature and character of who God is. You could spend the rest of your life, and Spurgeon says that when you think about these things, it deepens the mind and it has the capacity to bring a peace to your heart, to your soul, that you cannot find anywhere else in this world. And as you begin to look at the scriptures, you begin to realize that it is the centrality of life and meaning to say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I love the fact that the Bible never even makes the attempt to prove the existence of God. It presupposes it because it's so natural to the human condition. Paul says it is unnatural. You have to literally hold it down. You have to suppress the truth in one's unrighteousness. There has to be stuff in life happen to you to cause you to push God out of your life. It goes against every instinct of humanity. I was on a flight and I was reading this book. It was a Christian book, and this lady was sitting next to me and she kind of saw the title. And she said, "Are you spiritual?" I said, "I guess in a sense, my faith is very important to me." And she said, "What faith do you follow?" I said, I'm a Christian. And she said, "I used to believe in God. I don't believe in God anymore." I said, "Why?" And she began to tell me, and she said, "Honestly, I just don't think it makes any rational sense." She said, "My brother got his PhD at MIT in physics." She said, "I've always loved science. I don't think it makes any sense to believe in God." And I said, "I bet on this flight, if you give me 30 minutes, I bet I can make you say it's more reasonable to believe in God than not." She goes, "You can't." I said, "I can't." She said, "You can't." I said, "I can't." I said, "Okay." I said, so I got a piece of paper out, and this is all I did. It's very simple. It's very simple. This isn't something I came up with. It's a famous argument. It came out of the Middle Ages. It was really a resurgence of it, came back from one of the, probably made the biggest influence in my life in the areas of philosophy and thinking and apologetics, a guy named William Lane Craig. And he redeveloped this argument. And some of you probably are familiar with this argument. And it's a truly, truly insightful, and it's what's known as a deductive argument. A deductive argument is an argument where the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. In other words, if the premises are true, the conclusion must follow. All men are mortal. Walter is a man. Therefore, Walter is mortal. It has to follow. If premise 1 and premise 2 are true, conclusion must follow. That's a deductive argument. An inductive argument is where the premises build up a probability. so that when you get to the conclusion is most likely, most probably, it's a probabilistic argument. You build a case for. This particular argument is a deductive form of the argument. And it goes like this, and this is what I wrote it down. I said to her, okay, tell me if you agree with this statement. Premise 1, there's only 3 lines to this argument. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. What's the key word there, by the way? Begins to exist. She goes, oh, I don't know about that. I said, okay, give me an example. Give me something that had a beginning that you know for a fact did not have a prior antecedent cause. Trying to come up, she couldn't come up with it. I said, it's pretty obvious. If something begins to exist, it doesn't, out of nothing comes. It comes from some source. You have to come up with some thing that you can say can come into existence without a prior cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. She said, well, I know that's where science points. She said, is that where you're going? I said, yeah, science. But I said, let me give you another one. And it's the law, it's a mathematical rule you can use called the infinite regression rule. And it goes like this. If I asked you to start at the number 1, and I said, I want you to count to infinity, could you begin the process? Could you start at 1, 2, 3, 4? Could you ever get to infinity? No. You could approach, but you could never get there. But if I said to you, I want you to start from negative infinity, and I want you to count to 10, what's the problem? You can't start, because at any point that you decide to start, by the nature of a negative infinite, what would there be prior to that number that you're starting at? A prior number. So in order for you to be able to get to a point on the number line, what do you have to have? You have to have a starting point, a t equals 1, 2, 3. So if the universe has always been here, how many past moments of time would there have been by now? An infinite. But if there were an infinite number of past moments in time, what would you never get to? You would never get to the present moment. But the fact that you have a present moment means what? It means logically there was a starting point and there was a moment to time. And it is the space-time continuum, and it began. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the entire space-time continuum comes into, ready? Being. It comes into being. And that's a big loaded word right there. We could spend our whole time talking about the concept of being. That when you say to somebody, how are you? That's a question of being. I am fine, being. See? But both of those states of being are what we call contingent. They're contingent. They're finite. You have to, at some point, get to an ultimate reference point that does not have a beginning, that is, ready, self-existent. If you ever hear people ask the question, well, where did God come from? If you ever listen to Richard Dawkins, that's Richard Dawkins' very basic, in a sense, childlike question. Well, where did God come from? That question makes no sense, because the very definition of God is that God is that being which nothing greater can be conceived. If God had a cause, then what would you have to ask? What caused the cause of God? Well, X1 caused that. Well, what caused X1? Well, X2, silly. Well, what caused X2? X3. Well, what are we doing now? We're going back to the infinite regress again. So if you go back to an infinite regression of past causes, what can you never get? To God creating the heavens and the earth. In other words, logically and metaphysically speaking, the very cause of the universe, of all that exists, has to, by its very nature, it has to be necessary. It has to be a self-existent being. It's known as the doctrine of aseity. It's this idea that God owes nothing to his existence. There is no potential in the nature of God. Everything in God is pure actuality. There is no parts to God. He is pure actualization. When we say that God is love, we don't mean that God has a part of him that's love. We mean that the totality of the very nature of God is love itself. When we say that God is truth, when God is life, we don't mean that he has parts of these things. We mean that these things are the very fabric of the essence of who God is. And he is the ground of all being. Now that's kind of heady, philosophical talk, but that's theology proper. It sets the groundwork for everything else that you build on top of that. And you've got to have that foundation, because if you don't have that foundation, you're gonna have cracks later show up when you have things like the problem of evil show up. See? You're gonna have problems when people now start attacking the nature of God, when you strip God of his essential nature. God is a self-existent, infinite, personal being who cannot be broken up into parts, and he is the fundamental essence of all that is. He is the only being in the universe that cannot change. That there is nothing that passes away in God. There's nothing that comes into being in God. That God is the fullness of all knowledge. What do we call that? His omniscience. God is the fullness of all power. What do we call that? His omnipotence. God is the fullness of presence everywhere. What do we call that? God's omnipresence. See, and if you look at your sheet of notes here, you'll see on Roman numeral 2, this is known as his immutable nature. It's known as perfect being theology. Perfect being theology. That God is the only one in existence that I hate to even use the word attribute, that's the word that we use. We attribute certain understandings of God. We attribute every attribute of God to its perfection. So that God isn't simply really good or really, really good. He is the ultimate of all that is good. Now, why does that make a difference in our lives, men? That makes a difference in our lives because if God is that which is the ultimate good, upon which no new goodness comes into him and he loses no goodness, God never becomes a malevolent God. God never does evil. That means that when you see evil in the world, this is the question you have to ask. What is evil? If God is ultimately good, of his essence is infinitely good in his nature, then what is evil? Evil, therefore, can only be what's known as a privation. It is the absence of goodness. So that when someone goes and commits an atrocity, to the degree that that person's atrocity is violent and dark and lacks goodness, it moves down the scale and we call it evil. You know, NYU, New York University, their psychology department brought back a scale a number of years ago. And they called it, ironically, they called it the depravity scale. And they said there's a word that had been stripped out of the psychological literature that they began to bring back into the literature. You know what that word was? It was the word evil. That they didn't like the word evil. Evil was stripped from the psychological literature because it had too many moral implications. The problem is, there are some acts in this world that are so incomprehensible of what people can do to people that the only word you can use for that is evil. And the biblical view of evil is that which there is no good that can be found in the evil itself. Not that good can't result from the evil, but there is no good in the evil. And the only way you can attribute anything to be evil is that you have to have the foundational standard of that which is good. And if you strip God from the equation, if you take God out of the system, there is no foundation now upon which you can adjudicate that which is good and that which is evil. Instead, man now does that which is right, what? In his own eyes. Now it becomes simply a relativistic approach to ethics. And now it's just, what does our culture today say? See? And that's why the instinct of human beings to know that is evil. I mean, our last several years in this country, I have seen more people march and protest the injustices of this world. And what I love about that, whether I agree or disagree with the nature of the marches and what they're marching about, the thing that I love about those protests is that deep in the hearts of every one of those men and women in protest is a cry for justice. And yet justice can only be found in a system in which there is some ultimate good. And it is upon that good that I judge and adjudicate everything off of that to determine whether or not something is just or unjust, good or evil, good or better. I can't make those judgments unless I have that ultimate standard. That is where theology proper starts. It establishes the very existence of God. It establishes the necessity of God. That he is the one that exists by necessity. God, look at it like this. God could not exist. God cannot not exist. God is a metaphysical necessity because if anything exists, it requires some ultimate, foundational, self-existent being that is not derived or dependent or created by anything else. He is a metaphysical necessity. See? That's why God is the only being that cannot not exist. I could have not existed. You could have not existed. You're not a necessary being. You're a contingent being that happens to be. And the only reason that you are, the only reason that you is the way you are, there's the being verb, is because there is an ultimate source of your being that said, let it be. This is why Spurgeon, I loved his quote where he says that it is the study of God, the master science, that will lead one's heart and mind to the greatest humility because you begin to realize just how small we all really are. That when I begin to try to live my life in such a way, devoid of God, devoid of finding my meaning and my satisfaction, rooted in the very nature of the one who gave all being, made all being possible, I will run up against a brick wall and I will find meaninglessness ultimately. Either that or I will spend all my time trying to create meanings as long as I can in my life. I will continue to accrue and acquire and build and grow and take as much as I can to give me some semblance of meaning and satisfaction. You know, Exodus chapter 3, next month, your speaker may talk about this. It's the name of God is given to us. It's a very powerful section of scripture. And it's that section of scripture that many of you are probably aware of, but I'm just gonna very quickly read through it and show you this one part that God and Moses have this interaction. Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding, verse 1, the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. As Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire, but not consumed. In other words, The source of that fire was God himself, not consuming the bush. He is the all-consuming, ever-consuming fire that bush God could allow to burn continuously without ever having its being deteriorate or ruined by the fire. So Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't the bush burning up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, he answered. Do not come closer, he said. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. In other words, the ground that you're on, Moses, there is a separation between me and you that no man, nothing in this creation can ever cross. The difference between me and you is not a difference in degree. See, the difference between me, I played tennis all my life. I am not Djokovic. I'm not Federer. That's a difference in degree. God is saying, everything in this world is different in a sense, in its being by degree. But when it comes to me, it's a difference in kind. That I am different in kind. I'm different in essence. I'm different in being than anything in this universe, anything in this world. Moses, remove your sandals. What you're standing on right now is holy ground, and you have got to come to the recognition that there is something so different about me that you can't even look upon me. Verse 6, then he continued, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Verse 7, then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them. Don't miss this. The same God that is the source of all being, that is this infinite, self-existent, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent being, is the same being that looks down upon his creation and has mercy. And he sees down and he looks into your world. Did you know that? That God looks into our world. He sees the depths of our heart. He sees the depths of our sufferings. He sees the cries of our heart. And he looks and he sees them. And he says, I know about their sufferings. Verse 8, I've come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them from that land to a good and spacious land, and a land flowing with milk and honey, the territory of the Canaanites and the Hethites and the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. I always resist this. And the Cellulites. They were a very big tribe. It's an old seminary joke. I always tell myself not to say it, but I just can't resist. So because the Israelites' cry for help has come to me, and I've also seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, therefore go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Here we go. But Moses asked God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He answered, I will certainly be with you. And this will be the sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain. Then Moses asked God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? And God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. That word, most scholars believe, was derived from the most holy name of God, Yahweh, and it is a derivative of Yahweh. I am that I am, the self-existent, ever-present, omniscient, all-powerful, all-good, all-loving God who looks down from heaven and sees the sufferings of his people. And he says, I will go down and I will rescue them. Does that sound like a familiar story through the rest of your Bible? What do you think? I will go down and I will rescue them from their sufferings and from their sins. And that is what you get to next month when Tommy comes and talks about Christology, and you talk about this beautiful doctrine of the very person and nature of God himself who enters into time. The timeless, eternal being of God enters into time and experiences time and suffers with us. It's called the passibility of God, that he experiences the sufferings of this life with us. He knows what betrayal feels like. He knows what rejection feels like. He knows what the weight of sin feels like because he took the sins of the world upon himself. And as Paul says, he became sin that we might attain the righteousness of God. Is that not incredible to think that that God, in essence, this being that is so different in kind, Isaiah, who got a glimpse of this God, all he could say were those three most beautiful and powerful words when he got a glimpse of the temple and a glimpse of the robe of God. And what does he say? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. It's all you can say. He is so other, but not so other that I can't know him, because in his great goodness, he has chosen to reveal himself to us. And you're going to learn that in your bibliology. You're going to learn that in the idea of God's revealed revelation of himself, of his nature and who he is. And this holy, holy, holy God comes into this world to represent every one of us in this room in such a way that he then exchanges all of his righteousness, his goodness, his perfections, his love, and he gives them to you. And behold, you go from an old nature to a new nature, and behold, you are now a new creation in his Son, the eternal Son of God himself. And you now take on the very divine likeness of God himself. And as the psalmist says, you can even be called little gods. Not in the bizarre, metaphysical, Eastern way that some religions talk, but that you reflect the very image of God himself when he puts his spirit in you, which we will look at in 2 months. Do you see how all the theologies fit together? Theology proper, Christology, the Spirit of God through pneumatology, bibliology and revelation that he has spoken and revealed himself, all the way to the end, to eschatology. Every one of these will fit together like a prism. And they are like a facet of the beauty and the glory of who God is. And men, as you and I continue to strive to see him clearly, to see him for who he really is, that invasion of his spirit in our lives has the ability to change everything in our lives, to change everything in our lives, to change our marriages, to change us as fathers, to change us at work, to change our joy, to give us a joy that is so surpassing. It's so abundant in our lives that I didn't say happy, I said joyful, a presence of God that is so still. It is a confident settledness in the very presence of God in my life. That is theology proper. It's the doctrine of God. And I would only hope that you guys would find this so interesting that you would want to go pursue more of it for yourself. The resources are abundant. For all the junk that can be out there on the internet, I can assure you there are so many unbelievable resources that you can watch and learn and read and chat GPT it, that you can learn about the nature and character of who our God is, and it can change your life. And I don't mean simply through an acquisition of intellectual knowledge. I mean that it seeps into the very fiber of your soul and your being and who you are. And then you will begin to get up every day and sense the clear purpose of God. Let me pray for us. Father, what a humbling topic to talk about your nature. A nature, Lord, that we cannot possibly fathom the infinite. How do you fathom the perfect being of your nature? How do we fathom goodness, perfect love, perfect mercy, perfect power, perfect goodness? There's nothing, Lord, there's nothing in this world that remotely comes close to the greatness and the glory and the holiness of you. Lord, I pray for these men, young, old, and in the middle. Lord, I pray there is a deep abiding of you richly in their hearts, that their minds might be so humbled tonight. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for your love. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.